Think closing investigations fast is enough? One small mistake can cost your company hundreds of thousands of dollars. In this episode, I share a real-life story of a mishandled investigation and the lessons every HR professional should know. Tune in and learn how to protect your organization and your career.
Welcome to the HR Investigations Podcast, exploring the issues, challenges, strategies, and solutions. Sponsored by RPCHR and hosted by Natalie Ivy, an HR consultant, licensed PI, and author of the best-selling book, How to Conduct Internal Investigations, a practical guide for human resource professionals. And now, here's Natalie.
Hey everybody, welcome to the HR Investigations Podcast, where we help HR and employee relations professionals elevate their investigations from routine tasks to strategic business protection. I'm Natalie Ivy, I'm your host, and today we're kicking off a special mini-series, When HR Gets It Wrong, Risk, Reputation, and Recovery. In this first episode, we're talking about one of the most common and costly mistakes that HR professionals make, mishandling investigations. So imagine this. An employee comes forward with a harassment complaint. You work it, you close the case quickly and thinking you've done the right thing. Fast forward 6 months. Well, that same company is facing a lawsuit costing about $250,000. Sound familiar? Well, unfortunately, it happens more often than you think. So here's a real world scenario. In a manufacturing company, HR received a complaint about inappropriate behavior. HR, wanting to resolve it quickly, only talked to the person who filed the complaint, known as the complainant or reporter, didn't interview witnesses, and didn't document the process thoroughly. Management was happy because, oh, wow, we got through that and case is closed, back to business as usual. However, that complainant filed a lawsuit 6 months later because HR didn't document their investigation or really follow any kind of established investigation procedures. The company could not defend itself effectively. The outcome, about $250K in settlements, legal fees, and a hit to also the company's reputation. This isn't about blaming HR, it's actually about risk, and even well-intentioned professionals can inadvertently create some pretty massive exposure without really having the proper training. So what can we take from this? Well, let's talk about a few key things. Let's first talk about speed. All right, speed is not the same as accuracy. Closing a case quickly is satisfying, sure, but if it's not thorough, it can really cost your organization, and it can also cost you your career for doing shoddy work. And in my podcast episode with Deb Muller of HR Acuity, if you're not familiar with them, they're an investigations case management software solution. And she and I would been around in HR about the same length of time, and we were talking some shop about this issue. And far too often, leaders in HR and employee relations, so those of you who are listening who may be at director, VP, or higher, there's a lot of focus on the length of time it takes an investigator to work a case. So in other words, looking at metrics like how long has the case been open? How quickly do you have some of your investigators closing cases? All right, great. I understand it. Fundamentally, we don't want cases to go on for 6 months, and we don't want investigators dragging their feet. However, the other flip side of this is if you happen to have an investigator on the team who is a bit more curious, that really does dig a little bit deeper into a particular case because the investigator's instincts really kind of were niggling at them like, yes, something's bothering me and I really think I need to dig into this more. Well, that investigator, who may be one of the stronger members of the team, may get dinged, if you will, by leadership. Why? Because they're not meeting their metrics. Because a case you went longer than 30 days on a case. Ouch. Look, speed is not the same as accuracy. So let's make sure that we're not just looking at the timeline of start of the investigation to close of the investigation. We've really got to look a little bit more thoughtfully at the data around that. All right, another point here is documentation. And documentation is absolutely your lifeline. You've got to have clear, thorough notes that are not only going to protect the organization, but also you if you're the investigator. Now, yes, of course, we've got AI tools today. But look, they're not the end-all be-all for note-taking. Look, you've got to be making your own notes when you're conducting your interviews, like when you know that you're interviewing someone and they're just completely giving you a line of bull. Look, you all know that. You already know in many cases the answers to certain questions. I know I do. And I know when they're giving that line of bull, and I'm going to document it in my notes. I put it in parentheses, lied. because I know they lied. And then when I kind of tally those up throughout an investigative interview, I also know the credibility of my witness, right? So these are things that are going to be important. And also, the investigation itself needs to be documented to show the steps the organization took in response to a complainant's allegations. I've said that numerous times on this show and in my workshops, where you have to be thinking about documentation, not just so that you remember stuff. It is a historical record for business continuity. All right. So it isn't just about you, it's about your organization. And then lastly, training. Training really prevents these kinds of missteps. Knowing how to properly conduct investigations, it's a skill you can develop, and it really pays off in real risk mitigation. One of our clients, they're a public sector client, they're a very large municipality. The HR director, who had gone through our training, as well as her assistant director of HR, she remarked that the certification training she attended with me saved their city tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. And, also it wasn't just, the tens of thousands in legal fees, but it was also other things that maybe you don't necessarily quantify. Like, how does the employee who reported it feel in one investigation when the HR team really did take it seriously, they worked it through, they did finish the case and then even follow up after the case. Look, also in my episode with Deb Muller, she's citing some very recent data that individuals who have gone through an investigation with HR, they are much, much happier about recommending the organization. In other words, they're going to have very positive reviews. It's something more than 50%. They will recommend that organization because they feel a lot more solid and confident in integrity in the process when they've gone through an investigation with someone who was properly trained, who did a great job. Even if maybe the outcome wasn't necessarily what they wanted, they know that they were treated fairly. All right, super important. And let me now share also a really, really noteworthy case. Unfortunately, it is involving, yes, the Society for Human Resource Management. Yes, they got themselves sued. Here's the case. A former SHRM employee, last name Mohammed, sued the organization alleging racial discrimination and retaliation after having brought up concerns internally. Well, central to this case were allegations that the HR investigation itself was flawed. The HR staffer who was assigned to investigate had very limited experience with discrimination complaints, and the organization allegedly prepared termination paperwork before completing a proper investigation into the retaliation claim. Well, a federal judge allowed the lawsuit to proceed, noting that the evidence suggesting the investigation may have been biased, and didn't follow neutral best practice procedures. The case culminated in an $11.5 million verdict, and that underlines the serious consequences when HR's handling of internal complaints is then questioned in court. All right, why does this matter? Look, this isn't just a lawsuit about discrimination. It's a lawsuit where how HR handled it and possibly mishandled it here, an internal investigation became a central part of the claim and the damages awarded. Right? It illustrates that even HR organizations, in this case, SHRM is the global trade organization for the human resources profession, they can face significant legal and financial risk when investigations aren't conducted impartially, thoroughly, or by appropriately experienced professionals. So with that said, if you really want to level up your skills, you want to make sure your investigations are thorough, defensible, strategic, I encourage you, attend my upcoming class. I've got a 2-day virtual certification workshop coming up, and I have a few scheduled throughout the rest of 2026, but I am doing just one during the summer. That will be in June. The information is in the show notes. This class is designed to give you the skill, the tools, and the confidence to really handle any investigation really effectively and before a costly mistake happens. All right, so that's it for today's episode. In the next episode, we'll explore another hidden risk, employee relations traps that can escalate small issues into organization-wide problems. You don't want to miss it. All right, that's it from me, gang, for today's episode. I hope this has been a good investment of your professional development today. And always remember, the best investigation is the one you don't have to do. See ya.
Thanks for joining us today on the HR Investigations Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share the show with any colleagues who will benefit from our strategies and solutions. For free bonus resources, simply visit hr-investigations.com. And remember, if you'd like some help with improving your investigative skills, or if your organization is in need of an external investigator to help with a case, please get in touch with us. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.